There is a level of wealth where the rules quietly disappear, where price tags stop mattering, and limits simply don't exist. This is the world of billionaire heirs, the ones who never had to chase money because money was already waiting for them. For them, luxury isn't a reward, it's the baseline. Private jets, designer wardrobes, multi-million-dollar parties. It all blends into everyday life. But here's what makes it fascinating. When you grow up with everything, what actually feels valuable? What do you spend on when nothing is out of reach? Because the deeper you go into their lifestyle, the more it stops looking like spending and starts revealing something much more complex. There's a level of wealth where spending stops being practical and starts becoming a language, a signal, a way to be seen in a world where everyone already has everything. And when you step into the lives of billionaire heirs, you quickly realize this isn't just about money, it's about identity. Because unlike self-made millionaires or even celebrities, these individuals didn't climb toward wealth. They were born inside it. Names like Allegra Versace, Anant Ambani, or Alexandra Andreessen aren't just associated with riches, they represent entire legacies, fashion empires, industrial dynasties, global conglomerates. And from the moment they're born, they inherit not just money, but expectation. So what happens when your starting point is already at the top? The first thing that changes is perception. For most people, buying a luxury car is a milestone. Years of work condensed into a single purchase. But for billionaire kids, cars aren't milestones, they're moods. One week it's a Rolls-Royce, another week it's a Ferrari. And not because they need another vehicle, but because choice itself becomes the experience. Scroll through the lifestyle of figures like Kylie Jenner, and you'll see garages that look more like showrooms. Lamborghinis in custom colors, matching interiors designed to fit aesthetics rather than function. And here's the part that's easy to miss. These purchases aren't just about ownership, they're about curation. Building a personal brand through objects, because when money isn't a limitation, taste becomes the currency. But that raises a deeper question. How do you develop taste when you've never had to earn anything? And that's where things get complicated. Take travel. For most people, flying business class feels like an upgrade. For billionaire heirs, even first class can feel restrictive, which is why private jets aren't just common, they're expected. Families like the Ambanis or the Al Nahyans operate fleets of aircraft that function more like flying estates than transportation. But again, look beneath the surface. Is this about comfort or control? Because when you can leave any country at any moment, when your schedule isn't dictated by airlines or borders, you're not just traveling differently, you're operating on a completely different level of freedom. Time becomes flexible, geography becomes optional, and once you experience that level of autonomy, can you ever go back? Now let's move into something even more revealing. Parties. Because if there's one place where billionaire kids truly express their world, it's in how they celebrate. We're talking about events where budgets aren't discussed, they're assumed. Birthday parties hosted on private islands, guest lists filled with celebrities, decorations that get dismantled after a single night, despite costing hundreds of thousands. Look at someone like Tamara Ecclestone, whose wedding reportedly cost over $10 million. Performances by global artists, luxury venues, details executed at a level most people can't even conceptualize. But here's the uncomfortable question. When a party costs more than most people's lifetime earnings, what exactly are you celebrating? Because at some point, the experience itself starts to blur. When everything is extraordinary, does anything still feel special? And this is where the psychology of wealth begins to show. For billionaire heirs, spending often becomes less about acquiring things and more about creating moments that stand out in an otherwise limitless environment. Exclusivity becomes the goal. Not just owning something expensive, but owning something rare, something no one else can access, which is why auctions become so important. Art pieces sold for tens of millions, vintage watches with historical significance. One-of-one items that carry stories, not just price tags. Because in a world where everyone can afford luxury, rarity becomes the real status symbol. But here's another layer most people don't see. A lot of this spending is strategic, Take fashion. When someone like Allegra Versace appears in a certain brand, it doesn't just reflect her taste, it reinforces the brand's prestige. When billionaire kids attend events, wear certain designers, or collaborate with luxury houses, they're not just consumers. They're extensions of influence. In other words, even their spending has economic impact, and that blurs the line between lifestyle and business. Now think about social media. Platforms like Instagram have turned private wealth into public spectacle. Accounts like Rich Kids of Instagram gained massive attention by showcasing exactly this world: champagne on yachts, stacks of cash, exotic pets, designer everything. But here's the twist. Why show it? Because visibility creates relevance, and relevance in today's world can be monetized. Some billionaire heirs leverage their lifestyle into personal brands, influencer deals, collaborations, even independent businesses built on the image of luxury. So now, spending isn't just consumption, it's content, and content generates income. Which leads to an interesting contradiction. If you're already born rich, why try to earn more? The answer might not be financial at all. It might be about identity. Because one of the biggest challenges billionaire heirs face is stepping out of their family's shadow. When your last name is already powerful, how do you create something that feels like yours? Some choose business. Some choose philanthropy. Others lean fully into lifestyle and influence. But almost all of them, in some way, try to redefine what their wealth means. And that's where spending becomes personal. Not just what can I buy, but what does this say about me? But here's something rarely discussed. Not all billionaire kids spend wildly. Take Alexandra Andressen, who has often been noted for a relatively low-profile lifestyle despite her immense wealth. Or others who focus heavily on investments, sustainability, or long-term ventures rather than visible luxury. So the narrative isn't as simple as rich kids wasting money. It's more nuanced. Some spend for visibility, some spend for experience, and some barely spend at all. Which raises an even more interesting question. Is extreme wealth freeing, or is it defining? Because when every option is available, choice itself can become overwhelming. Without limits, there's no clear direction. No natural constraints to guide decisions. And that's something most people never have to think about. For the average person, constraints create structure. Budget defines priorities. Scarcity shapes desire. But remove all of that, and suddenly you're left with pure possibility. Sounds ideal, right? But what if unlimited possibility makes it harder to find meaning? Because if you can have anything, what actually matters? And this is where the conversation shifts from lifestyle to psychology, because behind the cars, the jets, the parties, and the designer labels, there's a deeper layer that rarely gets attention. The internal world of people who never had to struggle financially. How do they define success? How do they measure achievement? How do they deal with pressure? Not to earn money, but to live up to a legacy that already exists. These are questions that don't have simple answers, but they're essential if you want to truly understand how billionaire kids spend. Not just their money, but their lives. And as we move forward, the picture becomes even more complex, because in the next part, we're going beyond the visible spending, into the hidden side of this world. The investments, the risks, the expectations, and the quiet pressures that shape decisions most people never even see. Because what looks like effortless luxury from the outside might be something very different underneath. By now, you've seen the spectacle, the cars, the private jets, the parties that blur the line between reality and excess. But if you stop there, you miss the most important part of the story. Because what billionaire heirs spend on is only half the picture. The other half is why they spend the way they do. And this is where things become far more complex than just rich kids wasting money. Because behind the visible luxury, there's an invisible pressure system quietly shaping every decision. Take someone like Anant Ambani. From the outside, headlines focus on grand celebrations, rare cars, and ultra-luxury experiences. But underneath that is something far heavier. A legacy tied to one of the largest business empires in the world. Expectations that aren't optional. Visibility that isn't chosen. it's inherited. So when you see extravagant spending, ask yourself, is it purely indulgence? Or is it also performance? Because in many cases, billionaire heirs aren't just living their lives. They're representing something much bigger than themselves. And that changes the psychology of spending entirely. For most people, money is a tool for security or comfort. For billionaire heirs, it becomes a tool for positioning. Every purchase, every appearance, every event sends a signal to the public, to the market, to their own social circle, which means spending isn't random, it's communication. Now think about risk, not financial risk, but reputational risk. When your family name is tied to industries, governments, or global influence, every move is observed. One wrong decision doesn't just affect you, it can echo across an entire legacy. So while the lifestyle looks carefree, it often operates within invisible boundaries. You can spend freely, but you can't represent carelessly. And that tension creates something interesting, because on one side, you have unlimited resources. On the other, you have invisible rules. So how do billionaire kids navigate that? Some lean deeper into business. Look at Alexandra Andresen. Instead of building a public persona around luxury, she's been associated more with investments and equestrian pursuits. Lower visibility, higher control. It's a different way of handling wealth, less about showing, more about managing. Others take the opposite route. They embrace visibility fully. Figures like Kylie Jenner turn lifestyle into a monetizable empire. Her spending, cars, fashion, homes, doesn't just display wealth, it fuels her brand. And her brand in turn generates more income. So again, the line blurs. Is it spending or is it strategy? Because when your lifestyle itself becomes a business model, even the most extravagant purchases can function as marketing. A $300,000 car isn't just a car, it's content. A luxury vacation isn't just a getaway, it's distribution. And when millions of people are watching, that visibility converts into influence, and influence converts into revenue. But here's something even more subtle. In this world, comparison doesn't disappear. It intensifies, because billionaires' heirs aren't comparing themselves to average people. They're comparing themselves to each other. And when everyone in your circle already has extreme wealth, the baseline shifts. Suddenly, it's not about having a jet. It's about having the better jet. Not just owning a mansion, but owning one in the most exclusive location, designed by the most sought-after architect, with details no one else can replicate. Which means spending becomes competitive, not openly, but structurally. And that competition quietly pushes the limits further and further. But here's the part most people don't consider. What happens when you remove financial struggle entirely? For most individuals, struggle provides direction. It forces decisions. It creates a sense of progress. But billionaire heirs grow up without that constraint. So where does motivation come from? For some, it comes from legacy, the desire to expand what their family built. For others, it comes from reinvention, the need to create something separate from their inheritance. And for some, it becomes unclear, because when you don't need to prove anything financially, defining purpose becomes a different kind of challenge. And that's where spending can take on a deeper role, not just as enjoyment, but as exploration, trying different lifestyles, different experiences, different identities. Because when everything is available, the real question isn't, what can I afford? It's what actually feels meaningful. And that's not something money can answer easily. Now let's shift to something even less visible, the transition, because one day, many of these heirs won't just be kids of billionaires. They'll become the decision makers, the ones controlling companies, investments, and thousands, sometimes millions of livelihoods. And that changes everything, because at that point, spending habits don't just reflect personal taste. They reflect leadership. If you've spent your entire life in excess, how do you suddenly switch to discipline? If you've always had access, how do you develop restraint? And more importantly, can the same person who throws multi-million-dollar parties also make billion-dollar decisions under pressure? These are questions that don't show up on social media, but they matter, because wealth at this scale isn't just about lifestyle, it's about responsibility. And that responsibility doesn't disappear just because the lifestyle looks effortless. In fact, it often grows heavier. Now here's where things come full circle, because if you step back and look at the entire picture, you start to see a pattern. Billionaire heirs don't just spend money differently. They exist in a completely different framework of reality, where money isn't scarce, time is flexible, opportunities come to them, and identity becomes the real challenge. So, the cars, the jets, the parties, they're not the story, they're the surface. The real story is how they navigate a world without limits, and whether they use that freedom to build something, or simply experience everything. But let's bring this back to you, because it's easy to watch this lifestyle and feel one of two things, either fascination or distance. It can feel inspiring or completely unreachable. But what if the real value isn't in copying the lifestyle, but in understanding the structure behind it? Because even if you remove the billions, certain patterns still apply. Using visibility as leverage, turning lifestyle into opportunity, building identity as an asset, thinking in systems, not just transactions. These are principles, not privileges, and once you start seeing them, you begin to realize something important. Wealth isn't just about how much you have. It's about how you think about what you have. And that shift changes everything. So the next time you see a billionaire heir stepping out of a private jet, posting from a luxury yacht, or hosting an event that looks unreal, don't just focus on the price, look deeper. Ask yourself, what is this really doing for them? Is it consumption? Or is it positioning? Is it freedom? Or is it expectation? Because the answer might not be as simple as it looks, and now it's your turn. Do you think billionaire kids truly enjoy this level of freedom, or are they living inside a system of expectations most people can't see? If you had unlimited wealth from birth, would you spend it differently, or would you end up in the same cycle of luxury and visibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you see it. If this video made you look beyond the surface, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to CelebSpot. Because here, we don't just show you how the rich live, we break down how their world actually works. And trust me, you've only seen the beginning.